Hello, welcome to Legal Action. My name is David Siegel. Thanks for joining us. Today we're going to be talking about issues under the modern law. Several different topics today. Jesse, good to see you again.
Oh, you too, Dave. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing well. Yourself?
I'm doing fantastic.
Okay, we want to jump into a few different areas.
Sure.
I'm going to call this modern law. We're going to talk about a few different areas and what's been happening.
Sure.
Let's start with real estate. This is the time of the year. People are selling their houses. Why do they need counsel? Because in some states, they don't.
Yeah, and actually there's a big push, like especially in Wisconsin, for people to go to closings without having representation. In fact, a lot of attorneys have paralegals do the work. However, it's under their direct supervision. Now, the difference is, hey, just like anything else, I'm not a mechanic, and so I don't know how to fix a car. Some things perhaps, but I wouldn't try to fix my new car with all the electronics and everything, and neither should you. Somebody try to practice law. It's a big investment. It's not like you're spending $100 on something. You're going to be spending, probably a couple, $200,000-$300,000. It's an investment, and so you know what? It's worth the extra attention.
Yeah, I know in some states like Florida, they rely on the title companies to advise the buyers as to whether or not there's any, problems with the title. But I don't think that's enough. I really think you need an attorney to talk about the different issues, prorations, closing, inspection, all these 5-day review. So let's jump in right now. Let's say you get a contract. You're selling.
I just wanted to say one thing real quick.
Sure.
Is that the title company doesn't represent your interest. Okay, they're selling titles. So,
but they want to facilitate.
They want to facilitate. Sure, but there's so many other things to look at. So, like you said, let's jump in.
Okay, so we have a buyer and a seller.
Right.
And the buyer comes to you, says, Jesse, I want you to represent me. I found a house. I signed a contract. I was told I have 5 days to have it reviewed. You're the attorney. I want to review it. What happens?
Well, actually, you should have your attorney set up before you sign the contract. I always like to look at it ahead of time because the attorney review provision, which we'll talk about in a minute, doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be able to change it. So what you need to do is to have your attorney already kind of selected. A lot of times the real estate agents will suggest somebody. That's somebody they work with all the time. I guess that's okay, but you want somebody who knows what they're doing. And there's a difference too, Dave. Sometimes, I've done transactions without any realtor on the buyer or the seller side. And so that adds another level of complication because the contract has to be taken care of. The disclosures have to be taken care of. But in this situation, assume that you have your realtor and he or she will fill out have the disclosures and everything else for you. And so you want to look at it very carefully. And again, that's why I say have somebody ahead of time before you sign it so you can kind of go through it. Nowadays, they have a standardized real estate contract.
It's a short novel.
It is.
It's getting longer and longer every year as new issues come up that they want to address within the contract. But it's getting to the point where it's so many places to sign and initial and clauses that may or may not apply. You really can't go it alone.
That's correct. You need somebody who is very competent. And so the first thing, obviously, we do, again, it depends if you're representing the buyer or the seller. So in this case, it's the buyer. So you get the contract, you review it, and there's also an inspection provision. And you have 10 days, really, but I like to get it in with the 5 because you have the 5-day attorney review. And by the way,
I think it's down to 5.
It's well, not
under the new agreement.
But not the. I don't think the inspection is. You have more time for the inspection. But I like to do it all together so that you do it under the inspection provision and you do it on the attorney's review. Now, attorney review can review any provision except, guess what, Dave?
The purchase price.
Except the purchase price. But now they have different check marks that you can do the review under. It could be, you could disapprove the contract, and that's it. And it's done, return it for whatever reason, because that happens sometimes. Sometimes, hey, there might be another house that caught your attention. Somebody wants to get out of the contract, and you want to take care of it, or maybe you have some information that, okay, hey, the house was underwater or something. We'll get into those disclosures too, but there's a lot of reasons for being able to get rid of it. Or if you're on the selling side, hey, look, guess what? I think I might have somebody who wants to pay more for that, and hey,
quite a bit more.
Of course,
Maybe I made a bad deal here.
That's right, and so I want out of this. I want this other person who's pre-approved, or a whole bunch of different reasons. So it could be.
But they can't get out of it just on price. It has to be another.
Well, they can get out of it on. Well, the attorney can just simply approve or disapprove of it. But when you're looking at reviewing the other provisions of the contract, some people like to, even though you have this kind of form contract, attorneys like to mess around with the clauses and modify them. There's a lot of good reasons because, hey, there's a lot of deadlines that you're required to jump through, especially as a purchaser. If you're buying the property, you're going to have a mortgage contingency, and so you have to have a written unconditional mortgage commitment within a certain time. And if you don't have it by that time, you have to ask for an extension. If you don't ask for an extension, then you're going to be stuck with it. Okay. There's also
Well, there's a new clause on that topic I wanted to mention. You can call for an all-cash deal where you're going to not finance it, you're going to pay it in cash,
Right.
but you still have the option. There's a special paragraph that you still have the option, if you would like, to obtain a mortgage. This is kind of new stuff that it never used to be broken down quite this intricately, and I'm not sure why they're making it so difficult, but that's one of those issues where you can buy it for cash or you have the right to get a mortgage if you so choose.
Right. Well, I mean, again, you don't necessarily, if you're buying it for cash, the mortgage contingency really doesn't apply because you're not going to be contingent. You're using your own money to be able to pay for that. But they also have the intent to proceed, and that's where a lot of people have an issue. Basically, you just need some evidence that you've applied for everything, intent to proceed on securing your loan, and that's another deadline. I find a lot of lenders I have issue with. I'm asking the processor or the lender, hey, listen, we need this. This is the date. Oh, we don't have. Listen, I'm trying to do my job, and that's why I have more of issues with real estate because boy, it is time intensive, and again, there are a lot of deadlines. But once you get through that, and you review everything else, again, you want your inspection. You want to get an inspector. Generally, either your attorney or the realtor will suggest somebody, and you want to spend that extra money. The inspector's not going to pull things apart or anything, but they're going to give it a good look and see, based upon their experience, what there might be some problem areas.
Many a deal has gone awry based on a poor inspection.
Oh, sure. And you want some of the common things that happen are, maybe the homeowner has tried to fix some stuff up and they've got the polarities crossed on some of the wires, or maybe you don't have the appropriate outlets near the water, the ones that reset themselves, right? GFI. So those are some of those things. A lot of times, okay, hey, the roof is old, but that's okay. A lot of times the boiler is old too, but as long as the appliance or as long as the boiler or anything else is working for the purpose for which it was intended, it's still working. It doesn't matter how old. And truth be told, I have to tell you, some of those old things really work a whole lot better. They may not be as efficient, okay, but they're certainly still kicking after all this time. But that's also what you want to, when you're buying a house, you want to put that into perspective so that you could save some of the money, okay, and know that you're going to have to make certain repairs at some time.
Okay. Let's talk about some of the issues where if it doesn't pass inspection or if it's going to need a lot of work, what are some of the options that a homeowner can pose to the seller?
Well, you have under the inspection provision and the attorney's review provision, you could send a letter requesting that the buyer, or rather that the seller, either give you a discount credit or that they repair it.
No, this buyer's not handy. They want it repaired.
They want it repaired, so you can have them.
They feel they've made a fair offer.
Right.
And another offer is not going to come in any higher, so they want to push the seller to actually do the work.
So you want the work done by a licensed, bonded, and insured contractor, and you want all those documents, and you want the receipts, you want any warranties that are transferable, anything else. A lot of times people kind of won't do that because, again, it means more money for them. And it depends on the size of the repair, what you're talking about. If you're talking about, okay, all right, well, here's a window that's broken, that's really not too big a deal, okay, it's a window. But hey, each house is unique and have their own kind of issues. But what you would do is you would send an attorney's review and inspection review letter. And that's interesting because you could also check, because technically it's a counteroffer. But depending upon which subparagraph you check it under, there's one which clearly shows it's a counteroffer. And that means that, hey, if they don't agree, they can tell you to take a walk, take a hike, and that's it, and deal is done. You will get your earnest money back. But the other one is basically, essentially, it's not really a counteroffer. Those are suggested modifications, and so the contract doesn't die because of that. However, if it's not, and this is an area where some attorneys kind of make a mistake. If it's not specified on what it is, then it's counteroffer.
Okay. A lot of times real estate has to be sold pursuant to a divorce decree.
That's correct.
So if you have a married couple who've been in their house for 10 or 15 years and they have a lot of equity built up, let's say the kids are grown.
Right.
No one really wants to necessarily keep the house. They want to get their money out of it, and the one can't do a buyout. The court could order that the property be sold and then the equity split a certain way. Is that often what happens?
Yeah, that's correct. But really, truth be told, if somebody has any interest whatsoever in staying in the house, that's really the best scenario, because you're not going to have the expenses you would have in selling it with respect to a realtor paying 5 or 6% of the purchase price. You're not going to have the title costs. You're not going to have a whole lot of other costs that you would.
Yeah, but you're going to have the bad memories. A lot of people don't want to stay in a house where there was a failed marriage or where they raised their children and now the children are gone, or if there was a death in the family or something. So there are reasons where it makes sense just to go separate ways with each having their equity.
It does, but if you buy somebody else out and you sit on it for a little while, even if you don't sit on it, you might be able to turn it around for even more. But again, the point is that if you're buying the other spouse out, then you're going to save this other money, because again, it gets recorded and there's no fee for doing that, because it's an exempt transaction.
What are the options with a divorce if
well,
you have real estate? Let's go through some of those.
There are 3 options. Okay, really realistic 3 options. Okay.
Number one.
Number 1, or maybe 4. Number 1, husband keeps the house. Outright. Number 2, wife keeps the house. Number 3, husband or wife buy the other out for whatever the equity is, and either they agree on what the equity is, or they have to get an appraiser, and that'll probably, depending upon where you're at, depending upon the size of the house, $350, $4-ish. It just depends.
Well, can they just get 3 independent market evaluations from realtors for free and take the average?
If they agree, they certainly can. But again, when that's
you're talking about an expense on a
you're talking about an
appraisal.
expense, right? So you could do it that way, and the other option, I guess that'd be the 4th option, and you see this a lot, and it's really heartbreaking sometimes. Well, actually every time, where they're underwater. Okay, they owe more on the house than any equity, and so hey, they just want to. The wise thing to do is to get out from under it and not have to worry about it, because what will happen is if it gets sold, then the deficiency or
has to be a portion.
The equity gets, exactly, either it's 50-50, 70-30, just depends on what it is. And so, I mean, that's going to be also part of those expenses too. So a lot of times what you have involved in that would be a bankruptcy of some kind. Generally, that would be a Chapter 7.
Well, there's another common scenario where the person who's maybe having the day-to-day with the children will stay in that house until some in the future date, and at that point, the house gets put on the market, and then the equity is split certain ways. So you're not necessarily displacing the caretaker, the primary caretaker with the minor children, but you don't want to deprive that other person of their equity, so it'll be sold at some later date at some agreed upon amount.
Right. You could do that. That certainly is an option. There are a whole lot of other just kind of realistic scenarios there. But what I found with those situations is that it comes back to bite you a little bit later.
Well, you never know where the market's going to be.
Well, you don't know where the market's going to be. Number 1, you got the time value of money. Number 2, you also have, and those are difficulties. You have, okay, well, what happens? Who's going to be responsible for paying it? Okay, if the other person's getting maintenance, formerly known as alimony and child support, there's a difference there. What's going to happen? Let's assume that, hey, listen, the person that's staying in the house is going to pay the expenses and bills. Now, if it has to be sold later, the other person who's not in the house is not going to be entitled to, because this person who's in the house is paying the debt down, is paying the interest down, is paying the taxes, and so there's a calculation, and that's another good reason why you really need an attorney. Okay,
right. Well, maybe you take the market value at the
that.
time of the split and determine the equity there. See, the advantage though of keeping the caretaker with the children in the house is obviously stability. School district, friends, community. You're not uprooting somebody from their life, so to speak, and making them move.
But again, a lot of the problem I see is, maybe somebody doesn't make the payment, okay, or they don't make the payment on time. Now, this leaves the other party in a precarious situation, because guess what's going to happen to their credit, Dave?
Sure, it's going to get shot.
Right, and so generally when we draft those type of agreements, we have, there's whole, and I know you've seen some of my work, there's a whole bunch of provisions that we put in there to safeguard that. And it really depends on who you're representing, right? Yeah. But generally what will happen is that's part of the deal. That
could be a 20-page document by itself.
It could. You have, okay, well, who's going to be allowed to go in the house? I don't want her boyfriend in the house. I don't want his girlfriend. So, okay, only related family members. And that's possible. Maybe if they agree, maybe not. Okay, I mean, that's been an issue a lot of times. Okay, so paying on time. If you don't pay on time, then that's a breach of the agreement, and it's in there, and it says it. A lot of times what we'll try to do, too, is we will sever the joint tenancy. Now, there are a lot of different tenancies when you buy a house. If I were to buy a house by myself, it'd be, hey, just in fee simple, that's it, I own it. If I bought a house with my wife, it would be tenants by the entirety, which is a form of joint tenancy, and I'll get to that in a minute, that protects married couples from creditors. That's what it is. But it can only be tenants by the entirety if it's the marital home. You can't have that for a rental or for a summer home or anything else. Got to live there.
Primary residence.
Right, primary residence, okay. So you can't have those situations. Then you have joint tenancy. And again, it's right of survivorship, which means if anything happens. So let's say, Dave, you and I decided to buy a house. Okay?
Tenancy in common.
That's, tenancy in common, but that doesn't pass. Okay,
we wouldn't want right of survivorship. We'd want heirs to get our house.
Right, exactly. So joint tenancy
Unless
would
you
be
think more of me than I think.
Well, maybe, Dave. It depends on who's going to live longer, doesn't it? Just because you're bigger, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, hey, you need a little of the steak fat in your life.
Knows.
That's true. But again, it passes outside of probate. So I said all this to say that generally what we do is have a clause in there that says within so much time they agree to execute a deed to change the tenancy from tenancy by the entirety to tenants in common, where if anything happens then, therefore, that the property doesn't pass outside of probate. I mean, you have other
let's talk about refinance, because that's a perfect segue
relief
to
do in the divorce court.
You don't want,
but
you
that
don't
way
want
you
the
take
house
care
in
of
both names anymore. You don't want the debt in both names. Let's talk about the refinance option or mandate.
Well, you're going to have to, because the problem is the court can order that you have the house is going to go to one person or the other. No problem there. All right. And generally, we usually say, okay, the other person agrees to sign a quitclaim deed, but that's usually in the position where it's not going to get sold. Right? I'm going to refinance. It's going to be mine, but I have 90 days to refinance it. Okay, but then we also have other provisions in there just in case I'm not able to refinance it, which will require it then to be put up for sale and require a realtor. And again, like you said, it could be 20 pages just for that one section for with respect to real estate. So when you're refinancing and you do the quitclaim deed, well, that's fine. Okay, so now I file my quitclaim deed. Now the house is titled in my name, but guess what, Dave? You're on the mortgage.
Just like I was when we first got the house,
exactly right.
And that's preventing me from getting another loan.
Yeah, because your income to debt ratio might be out of whack there.
Now I'm a renter when I really want to be an owner.
Right, and so there's going to be issues there. That's why it's important to consult with an attorney who is cognizant of the divorce laws, who does divorce, and also who knows these other areas, real estate, and there are so many other things too. Bankruptcy plays a part in that. All kinds of different things.
Let's talk about a situation where, in this example, the wife winds up getting the house.
Right.
She refinances. She's able to do it, and then lo and behold, a few months later, she loses her job, has an illness or an injury, and she's off work for maybe 6 months. She's fallen behind on the mortgage. This is a new mortgage that she refinanced on. And the mortgage company wants her to pay up and get caught up in one lump sum. Otherwise, they're threatening to foreclose. What kind of options does she have?
Well, if she wants to keep the house, well, there's a couple options. If she wants to keep the house, and obviously she wants to keep it, she could do a Chapter 13, which is a consolidation or partial repayment, whereby the secured debt has to be paid within 36, so 3 or 5 years,
so the arrears,
or any time in between, the arrearage part, but also it includes your car. So if you have a car and you're making payments on it, you owe $10,000 on it, that gets included in that. If you lease, that's different. That's not part of it. That's, you'll have your expenses. And so what happens is you put all of your assets and your liabilities together, and what you arrive at some point here is what you have left after those allowable, and I say allowable expenses, okay?
How's the
so
lender affected, though? That's what I'm most concerned about.
the lender's not going to be really too much affected, because once you file that,
Right, they were on the verge of foreclosure.
well, it's too bad, because once you file the Chapter 13, an automatic stay goes into play. Now, that's provided you haven't been, you haven't filed multiple filings. So once you do that, then you are going to be able to make payments on that arrearage that you owe, but you're also still going to have to pay what's current. And then after, depending, anywhere from the 3 to the 5 years or any place in between there, if it gets paid off, you're done. And now, you also have your unsecured debts, which in a Chapter 13 are paid as little as 10 cents on the dollar, and I've seen them 100%, because the people have the money, they just don't have all the money at the same time.
Yeah. Have you personally ever seen a 10% case go through when you were on the creditor side?
10% of?
10% of a claim that you might have had against someone. Have you ever seen that go through to completion? Okay, but it's kind of rare.
It is, but in a Chapter 13, yeah.
In a Chapter 13.
Yeah, so.
Now keep in mind, when they're in the 13, now this is important.
Right.
The lender is going to be watching very closely.
Oh, sure.
To see has the debtor made the trustee payment, which takes care of the arrearage, and has the debtor made the ongoing mortgage payment in a timely manner. If not, they'll come running into the bankruptcy court and ask for permission to avoid the bankruptcy, modify the stay, and proceed with foreclosure.
Well, that's okay, because then if they do that and they proceed with foreclosure, you get somebody who's familiar with foreclosure defense, and there are a lot of different thoughts and things on that, but there's discovery that you have to do, there's mediation that you have to go through, there's more time, and so essentially, it can be stretched out for quite some time. But you can also convert, and again, everything.
Sell. Maybe sell.
Or sell
Put it
it.
on the market and sell. And
do a short sale. But the deal, though, Dave, is you have these options available. And again, it depends on your specific, unique situation. So in a situation like that, somebody might even be able to do, after you'd go through the foreclosure stuff, and then that's the end of that, and they get ready to, okay, sorry, we're going to have it. Okay, now I filed my Chapter 7, and we're done.
Yeah.
And it's a shame, but again, those are usually the things that happen, which is, it's a big life event. It's a divorce. It's an illness. It's a loss of a job. Things are tough.
Well, that's what I think a lot of times in a divorce case, the house really should be sold.
Sure.
Because it takes often both spouses' income to make it work.
Absolutely.
And when now you're talking about only one spouse or former spouse having the house, refinancing the entire debt in his or her own name,
right.
Now maybe their housing expense is too great, and they would have actually been better off getting something smaller, more affordable, being able to manage, because the money needs to be put somewhere else too. If you got kids and you got other debts and your transportation,
well,
people
you need
are really hurting themselves with big houses.
But that's why, again, you need to talk to somebody, and it's so difficult, because houses are emotional. Like you said, some people feel like, oh, I can't wait to get out of here. Other people feel like, heck, this is my house. I put a lot of sweat. I don't, I want to keep it. People have all different kinds of thoughts, but again, you want to be able to discuss these things with an attorney who does that type of law, who does domestic relations, who also does real estate, who also does bankruptcy, who has knowledge on a lot of other general stuff that really come into play, because that's what you're going to be thinking about in terms of, okay, hey, look, okay, yeah, you're going to refi. All right, well, hey, maybe if that's what your plan is, I'll have somebody go in and just try to check it out and just see where they fall.
Right.
And because nothing I'm going to tell them, if they're headstrong sometimes, and I understand it, is going to, but if they go in there and it's like, I'm sorry, you're not going to be able to, there's just no way.
Yeah. We're talking about modern law here. We really need to talk about the new tax law that's going into effect, which limits the amount you can deduct for state and local taxes of up to $10,000.
Well,
so
Dave,
that's going to affect people in bigger tax situations,
sure.
the more expensive homes. It's a factor.
We're losing a lot, but we're going to get some other things. Again, the problem is, at least for me, and I'm not a tax attorney or an accountant, but that's going to affect all of us. So we won't know until this, next year how that's going to kind of shake out.
Well,
it might be good for some people.
If someone's in a modest home with fairly low real estate taxes, they're not going to be affected. It's those that have expensive homes where the tax is greater than $10,000. They're not going to be able to deduct anything over that amount. It's going to be fully taxable.
Which is why you saw, or even so, also your equity line as well you're going to have an issue with that too, because that's going to be included in the total cap.
Right. Let's talk more about real estate here. When is the time to sell and when is the time not to sell?
Well, the best time is
Historically.
in the spring. Historically, in the spring, that's when people start looking. But you also see houses that are for sale all of the time. But the springtime is better. Hey, people are looking. But that's also because the kids are getting out of school. Nobody wants to yank their kids out of a school district where they're at and where they're familiar and everything else, in the middle or just pretty close to the end, especially if they're graduating or something of that nature. Okay. And so, that's so because in the spring, okay, the kids get out for the summer, but also that gives you some time, and it's because there's more of a plethora of houses to look at, then I think really it can be a buyer's market because you have so much to choose from, unless you're set on this particular house.
Okay. But there always is a time because there's plenty of people who don't have children.
A better time.
There's divorces,
Right.
there's relocations, there's first-time home buyers
Sure.
who want to get out of the apartment or the house with mom and dad. So
And like you said, relocations, I'm guessing that you meant with that one in terms of a job relocation.
yeah, if someone
Yeah, right,
sends
sure.
you
Yeah,
out to
yeah.
Peoria, you don't want to rent out there, you want to buy a house. It could be December, it could be January, February, not the ideal time.
Correct.
But you might get a good deal in terms of pricing
Yeah.
for someone who needs to sell. Okay, we've got a couple minutes left, Jesse. Let's talk a little bit about the Chapter 13 scenario where you're completely upside down. You have a second mortgage or the first mortgage doesn't exceed the value of the property, plus you have a second. So you're way upside down. How can you get rid of that lien on the second?
Well, if your house is, let's say the fair market value of your house, just for the sake of
Keep it even.
is $200,000.
Perfect.
And I owe $225,000. I can even say that.
Okay, so
But
you're upside down just on your first.
just on my first. My second one is $50,000.
And that was a home line of credit that you...
It just, pay your bill some way.
Okay.
So in the Chapter 13 scenario, what can happen in that particular instance is you will have to pay back the secured portion of your original one. But the second, the equity, can be treated as an unsecured debt, which means that you would only have to pay 10% on the dollar for that. But that's only if you want to keep the house.
And you have to complete the case from start to
Well,
finish.
right. If you don't, just like anything, if it's the case isn't completed, it's
Then the lien slaps back on
everything
at
goes back
100%.
on there. You betcha. Yeah.
All right. Well, if you can turn a $50,000 lien and pay it back $5,000 over 60 months,
Sure.
that sounds like an incredible financial tool.
It really is. The same is true, and I believe, Dave, they call it a cram down, right, for your automobile?
Yes.
Can you explain a little bit about that?
Well, it's when your vehicle is purchased more than 2.5 years ago,
Yep.
and the market value is less than what you owe. You can pay the market value back in full and pay the unsecured portion at less than 100%. So it's a similar feature, but it's different for a car than a house. But it's something that gives homeowners and auto owners an advantage on how to restructure some debt.
So again, it just depends upon your individual situation, and it depends on what you have going on too. If you're in the midst of a divorce, or there's some financial issues, or anything else, or hey, even if you're just again a first-time home buyer, you're selling and buying, you want to make sure that hey, look, you get the proper representation, the proper help.
Okay, so we talked about real estate, the right time to buy, the need to have an attorney, how it interplays with divorce, on whether you're going to sell, keep, refinance, or both. Often, sometimes just keep the property.
That's true. Yeah,
and then there's a Chapter 13. If you're upside down, how you can strip the second lien, how you can save it from foreclosure, all relating to real estate, whether it's real estate, divorce, or bankruptcy.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Thanks, Jesse.
Dave, you bet.
Great seeing you.
You as well.
We'll see you next time on Legal Action. Take care.